Many seekers then experience a sense of emptiness. How does one turn back and transition from this nothingness to the fullness of I am?
Okay. The mind, the finite mind that is accustomed to knowing objects, looks, so to speak, at awareness. It can't really look at awareness, but it looks at awareness, and it superimposes onto it its knowledge of objects, and it recognizes, oh, there's an absence of objects there. It's empty. And therefore the mind says it's boring. So awareness is only empty from the point of view of the object-knowing mind. In its own experience of itself, it is full.
Mm-hmm.
So the mind, for instance, let's say you're resting in awareness as awareness, the mind will consider that experience is boring. Why? Because the mind is superimposing a blank, empty nothingness onto the fullness of being. Let me give you an illustration. Imagine a woman has been on vacation for 3 weeks, and she comes back home, and she gets to the airport, but she's got 2 heavy cases. They're too heavy for her to get home. So she calls a local taxi driver, calls the local Uber. She books an Uber, and the Uber driver comes to pick her up and delivers her to her home. But her cases are very heavy. So the driver says, "Can I help you in with your cases?" And she says, "Yes, sure, thank you." So they go into the woman's home. The woman goes in. The Uber driver comes in carrying her 2 heavy suitcases. He puts them down in the sitting room, and she looks up and she says, "Oh my goodness, it's gone." Uber driver looks at her and says, "What do you mean?" She says, "My painting, my favorite painting.
Okay.
It's gone. It must have been stolen." The Uber driver looks back at the wall. He's puzzled by what she's saying. He looks at her again. "My favorite painting used to be there. It's gone." Again, he looks at the wall. He doesn't see the absence of a painting because he hadn't seen the painting in the first place. She sees an absence of a painting. He sees the presence of the wall. They're looking at the same thing. She considers it an absence because she's seeing it through the filter of her memory of the painting. He doesn't filter his experience through his memory. He's just looking at the fullness of the wall. There's nothing missing there. So it's exactly the same. The mind considers awareness a blank, empty nothing. There's something missing. It's not full of objects. It's not exciting. It's not fun. So the mind superimposes a blank, empty nothingness onto our true nature and calls it boring. Whereas in awareness's experience of itself, awareness is not comparing its experience of itself with the content of experience, thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions. So in its experience of itself, it is full. Not full of objects, full of itself alone. But for the mind, awareness is empty. For awareness is full, presence, not absence.
That really, really makes sense. Yeah. I wanted to ask if the waking state is a kind of a dream within infinite consciousness. Can you dive into what exactly happens when we wake up from this dream?
Yes. The English poet William Wordsworth said, "Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting." And what he was referring to was just that when we wake up in the waking state, or when we're born into the waking state, or indeed when we wake up in the waking state in the morning, we really fall asleep to our true nature. In that sense, the waking state could be said to be a kind of waking dream. What is meant by this? Our essential self, you can call it a self, our true nature, our essence, is the fact of being, or being aware, or awareness itself.
Mm-hmm.
And all experience appears in awareness. It is known by awareness, and it is made of awareness. In other words, awareness or consciousness, I use the words synonymously, it is the only substance present in experience. The only substance that has ever been known is awareness, or knowing, or consciousness. And of course, it is awareness that knows that knowing, that awareness. Now, in its own experience of itself, prior to the arising of objective experience, thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perception, awareness, the only experience it has of itself is the awareness of its own being.
Yeah.
If it were to express that experience, it can't without the use of the finite mind, but if it were to express that experience, all awareness could say about itself is, I am. Words, I am, express awareness is knowledge of itself, the awareness of being. Mm. Now, awareness has the capacity to modulate itself in the form of perception. Actually, in the case of a human being, thought and perception. The finite mind consists of the activities of thought and perception, but thought and perception are not added into awareness from the outside. It is awareness itself that assumes the form of thought and perception, in the same way that a movie is not placed onto a screen from the outside. It is the screen itself that appears as the movie, that colors itself in the form of the movie. So we could say that awareness colors itself, modulates itself in the form of thought and perception, and in doing so, fragments itself. In the same way that the single screen appears as 10,000 people in a crowd in a movie, but it's the screen itself that is not really fragmenting itself, because there are no fragments there in the movie, but it appears as 10,000 things, although the screen is one thing. The screen assumes the form of the movie, assumes the appearance of 10,000 things, and in doing so, it seems to veil itself with its own activity. So when we're looking at the screen, we seem not to be seeing the screen, and we seem to be seeing 10,000 things, but it's exactly the same. Awareness, who we truly are, that which truly is, not just who we as individuals truly are, but the reality of all that is a single, homogeneous, unified, indivisible, infinite field. But it has the capacity to modulate itself in the form of thought and perception. And in doing so, it appears to itself as the universe. So through the activities of thought and perception, awareness veils itself with its own activity. The activities of thought and perception are its own imagination. But it simultaneously rises in the form of thought and perception, and then loses itself in its own imagination. So the waking state arises within awareness, and then awareness loses itself in that state, like an actor who plays the part of a character, but he gives himself so fully to the part that he loses himself in it and seems to become the character. So it's the same thing. Awareness arises in the form of thought and perception, fragments or seem to fragment itself. The unity of its own being now appears as a multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves, And it localizes itself within its own imagination as one of those selves, or as a multiplicity of selves.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing so seems to become something temporary, finite, a limited person or a limited self.
No, I really relate to this, especially because as an actor myself, I've experienced being fully lost into the role. My experience with the projects that I was doing, I remember how sometimes you just give yourself and you just put so much attention into it that you just completely lose yourself in.
Yes. William Blake said a beautiful thing. He said, eternity is in love with the productions of time. To be in love with, to be one with. Consciousness gives itself so fully to its own imagination that it holds nothing of itself back. It doesn't stand back and say, oh, I'm really consciousness. I'm just going to imagine the creation, the manifestation within myself. It is in love with the productions of time. It gives itself utterly, completely to its own imagination, to its own creativity. But it pays a price for doing so. In doing so, it overlooks its own nature and therefore loses touch with the peace that is its nature. And it's for that reason that in the heart of all individuals that there lives this wound in the heart of all individuals. And that wound seeks one thing alone, seeks to be returned to its source, to be divested of the limitations that the individual borrows from the content of experience, just longs to go home and to stand revealed again as the infinite.
So beautifully explained. Yeah, we long to go back to that original state. Yeah.
Every desire for happiness, every search for enlightenment, every longing for God are just different ways that the finite mind formulates this longing that the individual has to be divested of its limitations, the limitations that it borrows from the content of experience, and to stand revealed as it truly is, the infinite.